An ideal guest is someone who knows what they like to talk about. And when presented with a difficult question that they're not really prepared for, maybe they don't have it scripted, they can still provide a thought out response to it that they genuinely stand behind.
Most hosts never achieve the results they hoped for. They're falling short on listenership and monetization, meaning their message isn't being heard and their show ends up costing them money. This podcast was created to help you grow your listenership and make money while you're at it. Get ready to take notes. Here's your host, Adam Adams.
What's up, podcaster? It's your host, Adam Adams, and today I'm joined with Taylor Loht, who we've known each other for years and years. Haven't been as connected lately because I was really heavily involved in the real estate business. I've got a couple things left, but I haven't really been focusing on buying more. And so Taylor and I have, in a way, lost touch. We stayed friends on social and everything. He had one podcast, which we'll talk about, and he got a new podcast about 4 years ago-ish. Taylor, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, that's about right.
And he's got tons of ratings and reviews, 588 episodes as we record, and he's publishing 3 a week every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. So, I mean, by the time you hear this, well over 600 episodes, and he raises capital to close on new deals. And so basically what he does is he finds passive investors, people that want to be part of real estate deals. He will partner with them and close on larger apartment units. So we're going to be able to talk with Taylor, the investor from the Passive Wealth Strategy Show. Hey, Taylor, tell us real quick about your first podcast, because I think we're all curious. Why did you start it, but also go so far into it and then decide to leave it?
Yeah, a very important question. And it was a tough decision at the time. So my first podcast was the 7-Figure Sales Podcast. It's been so many years. I don't even think about it anymore, to be honest with you. It's been so many years since I left it. And I talked with real estate investors, sales trainers, and people doing generally large deals, although not just focused on the real estate space, on what it takes to close 7-figure and up deals. And I probably did north of 100 episodes, somewhere around there. I don't really remember anymore. But ultimately decided to leave it because while the show was growing and I was gaining some traction, it was really not in the vein that I ultimately wanted to focus on. I wanted to focus on real estate investing because at the end of the day, the business behind all of this is a real estate investing business where the goal is to connect with potential partners, to connect with investors and other people in the space. So having a podcast that was like kind of tangentially related, but not really, wasn't serving the main purpose. And then kind of on the side of that, I interviewed a lot of sales trainers. I still have many of their books on my bookshelf back behind the camera here. And after doing, I don't know, maybe 5 or 10 of them, I started to realize that most of them kind of have the same things to say. Or I had one person on who had written a book and I bought his book and read it in preparation to have him on the show. And I, asked him about, hey, let's talk about your book. And he's like, I don't believe that stuff anymore. And I'm like, what? So that was interesting. It made for an interesting discussion, but ultimately the topic became disinteresting to me. And from my perspective,
not that one episode, not that one specific episode, the topic of the whole podcast.
Yeah.
Okay.
That one specific episode was a little painful to go through. That was probably 6 years ago or so that I recorded that one, but it was like just another thing on the pile of, man, these guys kind of all have the same thing to say. And they really try to keep their message fresh to keep getting like consulting gigs ultimately. And maybe I'm a little cynical on that, but really I wanted to talk about real estate investing and building wealth through real estate. So made the decision to end the other show, reformulate the new show and move on. So current show, the Passive Wealth Strategy Show, and having a lot of fun with it.
Taylor, I'd say there's 3-ish reasons people start podcasts. Well, under one umbrella, there's 2. It's to make more income or to make an impact, and or both, right? Under one way, it's income and impact. But if you think about it in a different way, there's 3-ish purposes that a podcast could give you. One is I'm learning things. I'm interviewing people. I'm asking questions. I'm learning and growing. Well, another one would just be I'm growing my network. Another one would be I'm adding value to my listener, the perfect value to the perfect avatar that I have. I want that person to see me as an authority in this space and I want them to work with me. And I guess the fourth would be that I'm specifically interviewing my avatar. I'm having good conversations with people that I could work with. And so I want to go back to that first one that you don't even think about anymore. You had probably north of 100 episodes. It was 7-figure sales. What was the last word?
Seven-figure sales show podcast.
Okay. So going back to that one that you ignore now, would you say that you were doing it to learn from those people that had done all that stuff and you ask them questions and then you became better at your own craft? Would you say that these were types of people that could be passive investors for you? Or did you just kind of have the wrong approach to it? It wasn't really serving your avatar. And so that's another reason why you ditched it. So if it was those 4 reasons that people might start a podcast, which one do you think you were like focused on?
Wow. So it was so many things. It was that I wanted to get better at sales and selling. So that was part of it. It was that I wanted to spread a unique message in the real estate investing space, because if you're in the real estate investing space, you know how many real estate podcasts there are today. Now, there were a lot fewer 6 odd years ago, but I wanted to have a unique angle on the space. And while well-intended, I think that was actually a mistake, because we all naturally have unique voices. We can't get rid of that. And if we really aim to utilize our unique voice, then just by dint of being different from other people, we will have a different show and a different message than other people who, say, for example, have a multifamily real estate investing podcast. So, I could have accomplished that goal of being differentiated, but more specifically closely addressing what I wanted to address by having a real estate specific or wealth building show. But ultimately, I would say it wasn't on the nose enough. I wasn't really building my network in real estate investing in the real estate space as much as I would like it to. It wasn't building my authority and credibility in the real estate space in the way that I had hoped. So wasn't really building me connections with my avatars from an investor standpoint or potential partners. So, it was a good learning experience, I would say, from what it takes to be a podcaster and starting to get comfortable having my voice and thoughts and opinions kind of out there in the ether for good or for ill. And some folks disagree. So I certainly don't regret giving it a shot, and I'm glad I did. And I'm also glad I made a change and was more precise with my messaging.
When I think through it and I think about the passive investor, because you raise money, it didn't probably seem like I had a real estate podcast. It was called Creative Real Estate. And it really fit my strength because I was pretty good at creativity. And it supported a lot of people to be able to be more creative. But my main goal was I want to raise capital. And I've got the show called Creative Real Estate. It's probably attracting somebody who wants to do the deal and do it on a low budget as well. So I was probably attracting somebody completely opposite than a passive investor who didn't really want to do the deal. They just want to be involved in them and so on. And I'm thinking through with the 7-figure sales show, your old podcast, it might not attract somebody who wants to just be passive. It might be attracting somebody who wants to be better at sales. And it seems like that's why I was curious if you were hoping that maybe those connections with those people that have been doing all these larger things, that they put some of that money that they make passively. I was just curious if that was where you were going, but it sounds like a good reason to stop it. And then you've got the Passive Wealth Strategy show, which how long have you had that again?
That was started releasing in 2019. I don't remember the exact month at this point. I think the first interview that I released was with Paul Moore. I think he was episode 2. Episode 1 was just me talking about the show coming out. I could look it up because I've got the files, but I think it was in March 2019 started releasing the show.
So I guess it's important to pay attention to this. You started one, you saw what you wanted to change, and then you started a new one. Besides the title of it, what else changed? What did you do differently when you launched that second podcast, Passive Wealth Strategy?
Let's see. That's an interesting question. So previously, I had been speaking with real estate investors and sales trainers and kind of people in that vein. But when I made the switch over, I really focused on just real estate investors and also people in the FIRE community, financial independence, or financially independent, retire early. There's a few different expansions of that, but focusing on different people that I was having on my show, but not trying to change too terribly much. I mean, obviously we're talking about different stuff, talking about real estate investing, talking about deals and different strategies. But as far as the things that I was doing, there's a lot involved with putting a podcast out there. And at that time, I started with an editor that was very expensive, way outside of my budget range at the time. And that was largely inspired by one of our mutual friends, Whitney Sewell, because I saw what he was doing. He gave me a reference to his editor. And I thought, well, success leaves clues. I'll use this guy. He relatively quickly moved away from them, as did I, and we found different options. But I switched to editing my own show, which I had done for the Seven Figure Sales podcast, which is productive and useful because you listen to yourself talk and learn a lot about what you have to say and the way you express it. But ultimately, it's not a good use of your time if you're somebody who wants to focus on higher dollar per hour activities, finding real estate deals, networking, analyzing deals, talking with investors, all the very important things we need to do in real estate. So the big lessons that I learned and I carried over were kind of the project management aspects, if you will, of running your own podcast. And especially when I took over editing on my own, the nuts and bolts of actually doing the editing. Now, after about 100 episodes editing myself, I got pretty sick of it. If you're being picky about it, you can take a really long time to edit a relatively simple episode. So I hired an editor after that point. But really the mechanics of running a show, of looking at metrics of how the show's growing, am I getting reviews? Am I getting leads? Thinking about, okay, what type of lead magnet do I have? How good is my website? Do I want to reformulate my website? Maybe I can look at some other people in my industry, see what their websites look like, and decide I like this thing they're doing, I don't like this other thing they're doing, and kind of be inspired by what others are doing in the space. But I mean, it was definitely a big advantage. I don't regret having done a different show and pivoted. The big changes were really changing the people that I was talking to and focusing on like a wealth building concept type of thing on every episode. But beyond that, there were a lot of mechanics to podcasting. That this microphone and the boom that I'm using right now, I bought for the original podcast, right? This mic is 6 years old. I have different headphones now because the old headphones broke, but a lot of stuff carries over.
So you mentioned, and I've got lots of questions queued up already. You mentioned changing the people that you were talking to. Would you be willing to share, like, who's the top type of person that you're interviewing now? Because you mentioned a few. You mentioned people that are doing the business, and I think you mentioned past investors, but thinking about everything needing to be intentional. Well, let's focus on intentionality of launching a podcast, starting a podcast. What questions do you ask? Who do you have on the show? Are you doing solo episodes, interview episodes? Who do you interview? What do you ask? That type of stuff. What is the new way and how is it working for you?
So as far as the type of people that I interview, that's changed a bit over time. From time to time, I'll have people who focus on passive investing on the show, but they're a bit harder to find than people who are more active, simply because the people who focus on passive investing, you know, they might be doctors, lawyers, other high-paid professionals who are already really busy and don't gain any value from being a guest on a podcast. All of my passive investors, if they really wanted to come on the show, I would have them on, but I'm certainly not reaching out to my investors to use their time on my podcast, if you will. But again, if any of you listen to the show and you really want to come on, well, I'll have you on. I'm not saying I won't, but it doesn't seem like a great use of their time. So talking with real estate investing professionals, when you get into the space and you're kind of desperate for guests, if you will, especially when you're getting a show going and you don't have much of a footprint, you can feel desperate to get guests. And sometimes when you have a higher volume show, like I would say I have a kind of higher volume show, when the recording backlog gets a little thin, it can get a little hectic to try to find guests, but nothing like it was before. You can start to stretch a little bit. So one topic that I've really tried to get away from as much as I can is infinite banking or whole life high cash value insurance. Not because I think there's anything wrong with that strategy or that service. I just think there's a lot of bad information out there from folks who may be well-meaning, but aren't particularly scrupulous in the way they sell their product, which is an insurance policy, essentially with a pretty enormous commission on the back end that the salesperson sees. So that's something that I've really cut back on. If I have a compelling guest that I feel represents the product responsibly, then I'm willing to have them on. But I think far too many folks in that industry say, well, buy my insurance policy and you will be a Rockefeller, or they very heavily imply that. And that after a few times, I was like, all right, I'm sick of this. I don't need to have these guys on the show. As far as ideal guests, so my ideal guest is honestly somebody who has their act together as a podcast guest in the real estate investing space. It sounds like a low bar, but it's really not. It's difficult to be an interesting podcast guest and to know what you can talk about at length in an interesting manner to guests, and to also express that to a host like myself so that we're on the same page right when we get started and we all know kind of where these lessons are going and the right questions I can ask and things you'll have answers to. So in the real estate space, we talk about pretty much every kind of real estate investing, including, for example, flips. Now, I am not a proponent of flipping as a way to generate passive wealth. It is certainly a viable way to make a lot of money in real estate if you know what you're doing, if you're in the right market, checking all the boxes. If you're in real estate, you know people who are making a lot of money flipping houses. But it is definitely not passive. The tax code reflects that. Go meet successful flippers. For the most part, it's their business, right? It's not a passive cash flow machine. Some turn it into that, but the vast majority don't. But if I have somebody on my show who's a flipper, I'll share my opinion, but then open it up. Hey, tell me what you think. Would you agree? Would you disagree? Let me know your perspective. And honestly,
you mean to the listener or to the guest?
To the guest.
Okay, got it.
Tell me what you think about that. You're welcome to disagree with me on my show. We've never had a major disagreement on the show. That's not who I am, but I'm willing to borrow a term from the common lexicon. I'm willing to platform different opinions from mine when it comes to real estate investing strategies. Yeah. So for me, an ideal guest is someone in the real estate investing space who knows what they like to talk about. And when presented with a difficult question that they're not really prepared for, maybe they don't have it scripted, they can still provide a thought out response to it that they genuinely stand behind.
I want to sit on here for just a moment. You've had somebody who talked about farmland, 4 ways to grow your real estate, 4 ways podcasting can grow real estate.
That was me talking about how that's grown my show. Solo episode.
Perfect. Some things about deal making, mortgage notes, and so on. I mean, there's been 500, almost 600 episodes. I'm curious, you personally in your business, you're mostly focused on, is it multifamily apartment investing or is it anything commercial, or what do you syndicate right now?
90% multifamily, balance, self-storage.
Okay. So what would be the purpose or the benefit to your perfect avatar to share about farmland or podcasting or mortgage notes, for example, if the main thing that you want them to do is invest passively with apartments, multifamily or self-storage?
That is a great question. And to me, it's, I think, best addressed by more, what's the kind of show I want to put out? What are the kind of interviews that I want to do? And if I was doing 3 days a week of extolling the virtues of multifamily, syndicated properties, B2B plus class in Texas, Florida, and other parts of the Sun Belt, which is, our strategy and what I invest in, honestly, I would get incredibly bored by that very quickly. And I think it would be disinteresting to listeners as well. My show itself is intended to educate about real estate investing and building wealth with real estate. If somebody wants to dig deeper and discuss multifamily syndication with me, talk about a deal or my thoughts on the market or whatever, I'm happy to do so. But at the end of the day, that strategy is not right for everybody. And the purpose of this show, again, is to be more educational. We were talking about a mutual friend of ours, Joe Fairless, a little bit earlier, who's done a daily podcast for just about 10 years or so, and pretty incredible. He doesn't talk about multifamily syndication on every show. It's a lot of commercial real estate investing, sure. But at the end of the day, I think our shows should add value generally rather than be repetitious and frankly kind of self-serving, I guess is the phrase that comes to mind. Ultimately, we put lead magnets on the show, like we do live webinars with expert guest speakers. And I put an ad in my show that, hey, if you want to join us, our next one is actually tomorrow evening from when we record today. Say, if you want to join us on this date at this time, go to this URL, grab your spot. It's a Zoom meeting. It's live, 100% free. We're not going to pitch you. We're not selling a program. You can ask any question you want, of course, within reason, but we've never had an inappropriate question. And then we're going to dig a little bit deeper into multifamily with an expert in the market who's really built an incredible portfolio and done some really big things. And if people like what the content is adding to them, then I'm confident that it pans out the way I'm, intending it to. Obviously, I'm getting investors from it, but to me, I got bored by the 7-Figure Sales podcast, and I really like talking about investing. I like talking about investing strategies that I don't do, investing strategies that I do. So I want to keep it interesting for me. If I'm interested, then I'm confident that the listeners will remain interested.
Cool. Going back to Joe, prior in the green room, we talked about your business coach, and we talked about how you're doing 3 days a week, Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. And I've got a couple of questions on this. So it's going to get to why 3, why not 1, why not 7 in a sec here. But I want to understand first and foremost, what does the 3 days look like now? I know it's Monday, Tuesday, Thursday. And I know that you did a solo episode recently about the 4 ways podcasting is growing your real estate business. So do you do solos once a week? Is it every Tuesday? What does the format look like Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday?
Sure. Great question. So I had originally started with 2 episodes a week, Tuesday, Thursday. And to me, that was a stretch. Like, wow, 2 episodes a week. This is going to be tough to get done. And when I was editing the show, when I was wearing all the hats, writing his show notes, doing the blog posts, all the stuff, 2 episodes was kind of tough because it does take up a decent amount of your time to do all those things that it's not hard to do all those things. So it feels like, I'll just do this one thing and I'll do this one other thing. But ultimately, it's taking time away from other things that you could be doing. So Joe actually, a while ago, I don't remember when, he challenged me to go to 3 episodes a week. And I said, all right, we'll go to 3 episodes a week and see if I can keep it up. And what do you know, I can. What does the workload look like from my standpoint? Honestly, it's not that hard. The hard part is giving an interesting interview. That's really the difficult part. As far as the time commitment of talking with guests, sitting down with guests, getting to know them before we start recording, all the things, finding them, it takes time. It's not that difficult, though. Really, the only main hat that I wear, I should say, in the production of the show is doing guest invitation and outreach. And that's something that I'm hesitant to give away because, again, the infinite banking thing. Well, if you're not versed on the space, you don't know how all the different terms that the guys use to kind of hide the service. I don't mean to impugn that entire industry. It's just I'm kind of tired of talking about it and I don't want to invite those guys or other people who I know because I've had private conversations are not reputable in the syndication space. But how can I express that to a virtual assistant to get them to do all these invitations? So I still handle guest invites, but as far as the back end of editing, following up with guests, the social media posts, YouTube, blog posts, that's all handled by the team, whether it's my podcast editing company or my personal virtual assistant. I'm looking at changing that up moving forward and bringing all of that capability in-house by hiring somebody else for the show. Sorry, what was the rest of the question? I'm talking too much about
no, mechanics. Okay. So the 3 days a week, I'm thinking maybe regularly one of those is always a solo. I can't tell.
Solo episodes.
And what are the other 2? Is it 2 different interviews and a solo? Or how does the Monday, Tuesday, Thursday episodes end up being? Like for the person listening, what are they experiencing?
Sure. Great question. So the solo episodes were almost an accident originally. So the podcast editing company that I work with offers certain packages per month. And when I went from 2 episodes a week up, the next package they offer was 12 episodes a month. Well, if you say Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, not every month has 12 Monday, Tuesday, Thursdays in them. So I was winding up having them do additional episodes. I was getting additional charges, which isn't that big of a deal, but I thought, well, okay, this is an opportunity for me to do a solo episode. I'm recording it. I don't mind editing it because I'm going to listen to myself and understand my message. So the solo episodes started as a way to get my edited episode count down to 12 episodes a month. That turned into a realization that through my interview episodes, I don't know how much I really express myself, my investment experience, what I'm learning, what I'm doing, everything that I'm up to, rather than just showcasing the guest. And it makes sense because honestly, it's uncomfortable to put yourself out no matter what. But for me, it's a little more uncomfortable for me to think of a lesson. For example, 4 things that podcasting has done for my business. Now, I'll grant you that particular episode is not directly aimed at my avatar, but that was something, it came out on Labor Day this year, that I didn't want to burn a guest episode on Labor Day because Labor Day is probably not going to get all that many listeners anyway. Still going to put an episode out, of course. And I was looking for other solo episode concepts to think about. And I had other ideas, and I still do because I've got many of those episodes coming up. But this was just something that I felt I had to put out there. I had to talk about what podcasting has done for me because it's done just about everything for me in my real estate business. 2/3 of my investors, and I did the math on this, 2/3 of my investors found me through my podcast. Prior to that, my investors all came as friends, family, and people that I met at in-person networking events, whether it was an in-person networking event that I ran. Now, I'm not a madman, and I didn't do what was yours? Every weekday in Denver years ago? I came to that.
Yeah, it was Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So we were doing, I guess, 12 plus meetups a month.
That's wild.
That's crazy.
So I ran pre-COVID. I ran an in-person meetup here, and I got some investment out of that. But podcasting broadened my reach so much that, again, now 2/3 of my investors found me through listening to my podcast. But not only that, as it stands today, 100% of my deal flow comes through a connection that I made through my podcast. And it was this guy introduced me to this guy, and we do those sorts of things. But at the end of the day, if I hadn't had an extra 30-minute conversation with a guest one day, the deals that I'm doing right now, I wouldn't be doing, right? So, and there's so much more. There's learning about the market, keeping a pulse on the market, because you and I talked a little bit before about the state of the market today. But unless you're, in my opinion, engaged in what's going on actively, privately networking with people, talking to brokers, talking with other investors in the market, you're not getting a true picture of what's happening because you're limited to what you can see in news article headlines. And by the time it hits a news article, a blog online, it's way old news. And if you're thinking that there's, say, distress in the market, well, people don't go out there on a podcast and talk about how they have a deal that's falling apart, right? But you can learn that stuff through the grapevine. And the podcast has been the most incredible grapevine for me, just as far as keeping a pulse on the market. And of course, learning about other real estate investing strategies and building connections. So to me, I wanted to put that episode out there because, as you might be able to tell, I'm very both passionate and grateful for what I've gotten back out of having run the show. So that's why I did that particular episode, even if my avatar might not directly learn a lesson from that. Now, the truth is, if my avatar listens to that show and they hear, okay, he's got stuff going on, maybe I'll schedule a call with him. You could see some connection there. But it was a message that I was passionate about. I wanted to talk about it. I wanted to put it out there. So I did.
Let me interrupt you and just ask, it's almost as fast as a yes/no question. Almost as fast.
I can talk a lot.
Okay. You do some solo episodes. It's Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. In general, are those all interview episodes normally, or?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So the format typically is Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, interview. And sometimes you'll put in solo episodes. Is that correct?
About 2 solo episodes a month.
Okay. And that's to fill the last remaining amount that you needed for that one company?
It started that way, and it still technically remains that way. We're going to be changing things up here in the future, but I don't think I'll stop doing them, specifically because it's a deeper connection with my audience.
Yeah. Speaking of Joe, by the way, your coach and somebody that most of us in the real estate space, whether we're syndicators or flippers or even real estate agents or lenders, we look up to him. We look up to him in a lot of ways, and he supports you and helps you. One of the things he's trying to get you to go daily, maybe we have time to talk about that on the episode, but I want to talk about his podcast for real quick because he's doing what you're doing. Now, you did it originally, I think you said almost by accident, and it's happening a couple times a month right now where you do a solo episode. If I remember correctly, when I used to spend more time listening to real estate podcasts, and especially your mentor, he did something called Follow Along Friday. So he was intentional about doing exactly what you said, talking about what he's doing, what he's going through. And he had Theo Hicks on for a long, long time, and they would both talk about their own businesses, where they were moving, their kids, and it would be more personal and talk about their own business. And I had a feeling, based on my experience being an avid listener for years of that podcast, that one of the reasons why he has been so successful is the whole premise that he's spending time letting his perfect listener, the listener, know what's going on in his business. Like you said, not just highlighting somebody else and featuring them and giving their story, but also giving our story as a podcaster, our story that we can resonate. I remember listening to an episode of Joe's where he got engaged. Months later, I remember hearing one where he got married. Probably a year later, I remember hearing another one where he had his first child. And I recall a lot of the business things where he was like, we're at 300 million. And then we crossed $1 billion. And then I think we crossed 1.5 billion. And these things add credibility. They let you know he's a person, and you're more likely to do business with him. And this can go regardless of the kind of podcast. If we're looking for investors, yeah, that's perfect. Now our passive investor understands who we are. I got some people, for me, simply because I posted about mountain biking. I like to mountain bike. I like to get on the trails. And a couple people reached out and said, hey, I've got all of these people that I could work with, but you're like me. So I also like mountain biking, and so I'm going to invest with you. So putting in those intentionally, purposefully, and on top, maybe accidentally, purposely putting in a regular amount of solo episodes can be a good way to get our perfect listener, the person that we could work with, whether on this podcast, it's a podcaster, can hear my solo episodes. And for your podcast, your passive investor can hear your solo episodes. Now they know you're the expert. Now they know what's going on with you. And now they're more likely to know, like, and trust you than they would if you skipped those. I've got a lot of questions, Taylor, and I want to make sure we hit a couple of them. Why does your mentor think you need to go from 2 to 3 and now from 3 to daily? What is he saying about going to daily episodes?
So his math was basically, and I'll see if I can regurgitate this properly. So I'm doing 3 episodes a week. He's doing 7 a week. So very rough numbers. He's getting in front of slightly more than twice as many people as I am. Now, the math doesn't exactly add up because you're getting a lot of repeat listeners there, but the point is the same. He's doing literally double the amount that I am. And he's not the only daily podcaster out there. He has inspired others. Now, he was the first, at least as far as I'm aware, and he's certainly the longest running. But the point is definitely valid that he's getting a lot more swings at the ball. And there are others out there doing it. It's definitely possible. It's a matter of logistics, really. To respond to your point about putting yourself out there, the transparency, people getting comfortable with you, 100% right. Not my natural tendency. So it's something that I'm kind of working myself to. My goal in life is rich and anonymous, and podcasting is not coincident with anonymous, but it's something, putting myself out there is something getting increasingly comfortable with over time. And solo episodes are a lot more personal.
You know who's rich and anonymous?
Who? I don't know. That's the point.
Yep, exactly. Exactly. 100% of deal flow was an interesting point that you made. And in the green room, you and I were talking about real estate and stuff. And my job in my syndication company never was to find a deal. That was never part of mine. And we had somebody full time calling brokers every day, flying out to different markets. They never found one single deal ever. All of the deals came just from me. And it's interesting. It's because of the people that I had on the show. It's the communication. We actually found on the deals that were the ones that we closed on. So very, very cool. And then 2/3 of your investors came through podcasting. And I think that that is really supportive for anyone listening to know that whatever your business, whether you're selling cookies, whether you are podcasting as a business, podcasting as a funnel to your business, that podcasts work. Podcasts really do get in front of the right person. And if 2/3, 66% of your investments come to there, it would be really hard to justify not having a show, for sure. I want to get to the metrics that you think are important because you brought this up. You mentioned, if I'm remembering correctly, you mentioned metrics are important. It was ratings, it was reviews, it was downloads. And I think you named at least one other thing that you seem to look at that you felt might be important. If I've got a new podcast listener listening now, what metrics do you think they should and should not look at as they're growing their show?
So I actually think downloads is a very mediocre metric. It's not bad. Having a lot of downloads is great. There's certainly nothing wrong with that. But if your podcast, for example, is driven by like a back end higher ticket sale, for example, even though I ran a 7-figure sales podcast, I hate the term sale because like when I get on the phone with an investor, I don't pitch. I never pitch. It's not a hard sell. It's a conversation. We're talking. If the deal's right for you, great. If it's not, that's great too. Let's still be friends type of thing. But you really, I think, need to look at the appropriate metrics for your business. So for me, my goal is growing my email list and growing my investor list. Those are similar, but slightly different things because I have different email lists. There's general email lists and then there's investor lists. And I keep an eye on how many people join either list on any given week is how we track it. And you can set up back-end automations through ActiveCampaign. I think you use ActiveCampaign. I'm not really sure, but great for automations and tracking data. And that's taken me a lot of time to learn and build because I've seen that, there's this data point that I don't have that I would really like to see, but I don't want to manually collect all this stuff all the time. So how can I build a system that will just tell me the answer or at least set it up so that there's like 5 clicks till I get the answer? You can't automate 100% of everything, but how close can you get? So looking at the right goals for your business, if you've got a business on the back end that is the purpose for your podcast, then how many leads is it bringing you? How well qualified are the leads? How motivated are they? And if I compare, I had also previously spent a lot of time, invested a lot of time in being active on the BiggerPockets forums. And I got a pretty decent number of potential investor leads through the BiggerPockets forums. And I tracked all this through kind of back-end automation. 0 of those people wound up investing with me. And that's totally fine. They certainly don't need to. I don't hold it against them. But that came to a business decision on my part where, okay, I'm not wasting my time on BiggerPockets anymore. I'm going to focus on the thing that makes the difference. So that's the value of knowing the right metrics in your business. You're never going to have 100% perfect information. Every month is up and down, whether you're looking at download numbers. Sometimes you're having a month that I don't know what happened, but huge spike in listenership. And then the next month it's down and you're like, oh man, I didn't pick up enough people. But if you keep plugging away, you'll keep growing. But really focus on the right metrics for your business, which for mine is effectively leads.
Okay. So in general, the metrics that are less important might be the number of downloads that we have. It might be the number of listeners we have in some cases, and it might be the number of ratings and reviews we have. Although those things can be beneficial, the things that seem to be the most important is how big is our email list growing? And you mentioned it's in any given week by week by week, which was interesting. You mentioned your investor list, which I think would be a customer list as well for in general, because some people are looking for passive investors, some people are looking for clients. And you also mentioned briefly how many actual investors, how much of these people end up buying from me? How much of these people end up passively investing in my next opportunity? And you even talked about how your efforts on BiggerPockets really got you a lot of the things. but it didn't specifically get you the one most important thing. And so you diverted that BiggerPockets attention more toward podcasting and other things that are very, very interesting. As we end right now, what would be the thing that you want to leave to a brand new podcaster, somebody who's been doing it less than 2 years?
Think about your lead magnets and think about how you nurture your leads. Because if you've been doing it less than 2 years, more than a year, I would say you're committed. You've probably done more episodes than the vast majority of podcasters will ever do. You're in the 10% or 5% that stick with it. But think about how you're really affecting your most important bottom line.
Love it. Good stuff. So I want to echo that. That's interesting because out of all of the people that I interview, a fraction of them think about it that way. Most of them seem to care more about the download numbers, and you care more about the actual person who took action because they listened.
Well, can I give you an example? I know we're getting toward the end here, but I put all my episodes on YouTube. I have someone who puts the video together. They'll do a ton of editing, but the video's on YouTube. And I've made a conscious effort to make my video look nicer. I used to have a crappy webcam. Now I use a cell phone to record, which does 1080p. I use Riverside, which gives really nice video quality. I have a very tiny YouTube audience. I mean, it's nothing. I have less than 300 subscribers. My videos get about 20 to 30 views. Sometimes I'll crest near 100. I've raised hundreds of thousands of dollars from my very tiny YouTube audience. If I was focused on trying to be a huge YouTuber, then I think I'd be missing out on the most important thing. Now, that being said, my goal is to continue to grow the audience and to continue to convert. But if I got too distracted by having a tiny audience early on and didn't focus on turning it into opportunity on the back end, then I think I really would be missing the most important thing. So growth in all the metrics is great, but really you have to focus on your ability to convert to revenue.
I love that. That's a good last thing for today's episode. Taylor, I want to say thank you. Thanks for jumping on. Thank you for everything that we learned from you. You kind of opening up the kimono, talking about your podcast, your old podcast, the new one, what you're doing, what you're focusing on, how you get your investors, how you track, what you track, why it's important, the difference between one episode a week, 2, 3, or even 7 a week, why we shouldn't do that, how you offloaded most of that stuff as soon as you could after editing 100 of your own episodes, trying to get it off onto somebody else. A lot of good stuff, focusing on the higher dollar parts of your business. Thank you. I really, really do appreciate it. And for the listener, Taylor's bio is in the show notes. Scroll down. You can check out his bio. Also, the link to his company website. So if you want to work with him, that's where that is. His podcast, just scroll down. The link is right there. And any social media that he wanted to share, we put in the show notes as well. So that way you can connect with Taylor. I will see you on the next episode.
By the way, one way to ensure that you don't miss out on great content that we're producing on a regular basis is to make sure you're subscribed to the show. You need to be subscribed or following the Apple Podcast or wherever you listen to it in order not to miss all of that. And before I let you go, I need to mention, because a lot of people are asking, do you help? Can you help me with this? And the answer is yes. My company actually does it. It's called Grow Your Show. And you can find that at growyourshow.com. Our clients, they call us the easy button for podcaster because they simply have to record their episode. And they know that every single thing else is done for them. We sweat the hard stuff so you can be the star of your show. And if you would like help to make sure that we're editing and publishing and promoting and doing your social media, it's all in one place. And I think it's pretty affordable. You'll have to take a look for yourself. Just go to growyourshow.com and check us out. And by the way, I'll see you on the next episode.